But first tonight, to the latest lockdown in Australia. As Sydney begins its 2 weeks of stay-at-home orders, the question is, how did we end up here, both as a city and as a country, in and out of lockdowns? In Sydney, in this lockdown, a limousine driver of overseas passengers had not been vaccinated and was not wearing a mask. He contracted the new, highly infectious Delta strain that authorities say is twice as contagious as the original COVID that swept the globe. But how is it possible that those working in the jobs who are the most at risk of contracting the virus, literally in contact with infected passengers and crew from overseas, don't have to wear masks, while the rest of us face a fine for not wearing one in Coles? The Premier Gladys Berejiklian, Health Minister in New South Wales, Brad Hazzard, and health officials, none of them have apologised for this incompetence that has seen us back in lockdown. It is directly their fault that there was no legal requirement for drivers transporting international passengers to wear masks. This is not just a small loophole in some complex area that they could have forgotten about. It literally doesn't get more obvious than making sure that those in contact with new virus strains are wearing masks and are vaccinated. This is a monumental stuff-up, and yet we haven't seen any accountability at all from the Premier. It's a failure that's put some 5 million people in lockdown, the entire Greater Sydney region. At what point did our leaders, and it's the same whether it's Daniel Andrews in Victoria or Gladys Berejiklian here in New South Wales, at what point do they decide they owe it to us to accept and own up to their failures, to say we got this wrong, we're sorry, and that's why you're in lockdown? And it's Sydney who's paying for it. School holidays ruined, businesses forced to close, people living in isolation, and of course, worst of all, people getting sick, and a few people getting seriously sick. Not to mention the inconsistency of the Premier herself not having to isolate when she came into close contact with a confirmed case of the Delta strain at a function at Parliament House, while the entire Sydney region has to isolate, and even vaccinated people who've repeatedly tested negative remain in lockdown. Furthermore, it's complete hypocrisy. The Premier has repeatedly boasted about her state's ability to avoid lockdowns. Remember this?
Firstly, just being good managers and efficient government. We've had, unfortunately, one lockdown in New South Wales about a year ago, but we used that time to build up our systems. We quadrupled our health capacity. We made sure our contact tracers were well resourced. We made sure we employed an extra 1,000 people to be frontline contacts with our citizens, including many from the airline industry who were unemployed at the time. And we made sure that we had the systems in place to be able to weather whatever came our way so that we would never go into lockdown again.
And now she's doing a lockdown but refuses to use the word.
You can use whatever word you like, but what is really important is for me to explain to our citizens who is directly impacted and what our citizens can and can't do. And we are making sure we get that information out.
The bigger point here, though, is how are we ever going to get out of this cycle? It'd be a different conversation if we'd all been vaccinated. But the fact is, when other countries signed deals with Pfizer in July last year, the Morrison government didn't. Greg Hunt didn't sign a deal until November, by which time 34 countries had already signed deals to secure around 1 billion doses of the vaccine. And at that time in November, places like the US were already rolling out the vaccine. This is not just Labor spin. The fact that Australia didn't sign the deal in July is evidence from Pfizer's Australia Director of Market Access, Louise Graham, and it's evidence she gave to a Senate committee in January. In this instance, Labor's accusation that the government was late to secure vaccine deals is actually right. The government, of course, was also unlucky that the deals it did sign didn't work out. As we know, the CSL candidate returned a false positive for HIV, and AstraZeneca has the side effects of blood clots. Although, as Andrew Clennell pointed out on Sky this morning, this hasn't stopped UK from using AstraZeneca to protect some 40% of its population. It has to be said that for a country, Australia, that was leading the world in dealing with COVID, we are now far, far behind. And while other places are now opening up and moving on with life, Australia is stuck in time. And this isn't just about rolling out vaccinations to allow people to go overseas and holiday. Although freedom of movement is a human right, and many people haven't been able to say goodbye to their loved ones before they pass away, or to celebrate births and weddings, meet new babies. These are moments they will never get back. And many businesses have also suffered with the borders closed. But this is the freedom to say no to our governments controlling us with authoritarian measures. I mean, when did state premiers suddenly have the power to lock people in their homes, to force restaurants to shut up shop, and to force people to digitally record their presence whenever they visit a cafe? It's absurd when you start to think through the erosion of very basic civil liberties. And now we don't even blink an eyelid. We have no choice. And this is all in the name of public safety, while the state government allowed those in direct contact with infected passengers to go mask-free and remain unvaccinated. No one has given Australians the roadmap out of this disaster. And at this point, it just seems that the future holds a perpetual cycle of lockdown and release. We need to know what the end game is.